The polished surface cracked, not with a loud boom, but a chilling, insidious whisper. It was the sound of glass bending, of steel groaning under impossible weight, hidden beneath layers of silk and civility. For Alara, the world had always been a symphony of hushed tones, the scent of aged paper and imported flowers, the feel of heirloom silver cold against her fingertips. But now a discordant note echoed in the quiet halls, a tremor beneath the perfectly manicured lawns. It felt like betrayal, sharp and unexpected, delivered not by a stranger, but by the very foundations she stood upon. Everything she believed, everything she was groomed to become, felt precarious, threatened by a truth as stark and cold as the marble floors of her ancestral home. The life of effortless grace was revealing its hidden price, a cost far greater than she ever imagined. When the world you thought was solid begins to crumble, finding the strength to stand is the only option left. Discover how one woman found her voice in the silence of betrayal. If you resonate with the fight for justice and standing tall when everything falls apart, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories of resilience. Her childhood unfolded like a carefully penned manuscript within the walls of Blackwood Manor. The air inside always carried the faint, clean scent of lemonwood polish and the rich, sweet perfume of blossoms from the walled garden just beyond the drawing room windows. Alara had known only the finest textures, the smooth glide of heavy brocade, the soft embrace of cashmere shawls, the intricate coolness of her grandmother's pearl necklace against her skin. From a young age, she understood her role was etched in stone, to be graceful, accomplished, and above all, to uphold the family name and its formidable legacy. Dinners were quiet affairs, punctuated by the clink of cutlery and hushed conversations about investments, political maneuverings, and suitable alliances. Marriage wasn't a matter of heart, but strategy, a fact as undeniable as the taste of the bitter, dark chocolate served with coffee. She spent her days immersed in languages she would likely never use outside gilded ballrooms, practicing piano until her fingers ached, and studying lineages that mattered more than personal character. Yet a quiet rebellion bloomed within her. She found solace not in the approved history texts, but in worn, leather-bound books of poetry hidden away in the library's deepest alcoves, their pages smelling faintly of dust and forgotten dreams. She yearned for a life where she could choose her own path, where her worth wasn't measured by her family name or the value of her dowry, but by the quiet strength she nurtured in secret. This desire felt like a fragile bird trapped in a cage woven from solid gold, beautiful but utterly confining. The first real crack came not through a dramatic confrontation, but a casual comment overheard during one of those hushed dinners. Her father, his voice low and tight, spoke of adjustments and unforeseen complications, with a man whose face was grim under the soft candlelight. The air in the room thickened, a sudden, unsettling coldness replacing the usual warmth. Later, a sharp, disdainful voice cut through the post-dinner quiet as a visiting relative surveyed Alara with calculating eyes.
Still dabbling in those childish interests, Alara? One would think you'd focus on more practical matters. The world outside these walls isn't as forgiving as your father's library.
The words, delivered with a saccharine smile, landed like tiny, sharp stones. They carried the weight of expectation, yes, but also a hint of something colder, something predatory, suggesting that the world outside wasn't just different, but actively hostile, and her sheltered interests made her vulnerable. It was a subtle threat hidden within social pleasantries, the first sign that the protection of Blackwood Manor was not absolute, and that the very people who were supposed to be her guardians saw her less as a beloved daughter and more as a pawn whose value was rapidly shifting. The scent of polished wood suddenly felt suffocating, the quiet a trap. The conflict had begun, not with a bang, but a chilling whisper of impending doom that promised to shatter the fragile perfection of her life. The cold, polished marble of her family's world offered little warmth, only reflection and rigid expectation. It was a world built on appearances, where every interaction felt like a performance. But then, she stepped outside its familiar, stifling perimeter, drawn by an unseen thread to a different kind of place. A bustling corner market, alive with the scent of fresh soil and sun-warmed produce, a stark contrast to the sterile air she usually breathed. There, amidst the vibrant chaos, her eyes found him. He stood by a crate overflowing with ripe red tomatoes, his hands calloused, a fine layer of dust clinging to his work-worn clothes. He was everything her family was not, grounded, real, radiating a quiet strength that felt utterly foreign, yet immediately compelling. The simple exchange about the quality of the day's harvest sparked something unexpected. His voice was deep and resonant, like the earth itself, and his laughter lines crinkled genuinely around eyes that held a depth she hadn't encountered before. It wasn't the practiced politeness she was accustomed to. It was authentic connection. A strange current seemed to hum in the air between them, the feeling both thrilling and terrifying. She felt the warmth of his smile reaching her, melting a small part of the ice around her heart. The rough texture of his hand, accidentally brushing hers as he passed a basket, sent a jolt through her, a tangible reminder of a world she knew nothing about. They began meeting in secret, stolen moments hidden from the scrutinizing gaze of her family. Each encounter felt like a defiant breath of fresh air. They would walk along the riverbank as dusk settled, the cool breeze carrying the scent of water and wild mint. He spoke of his work, his dreams, his simple life, and she listened, captivated by the honesty and passion that poured from him. She, in turn, shared fragments of her constrained existence, the unspoken pressures, the suffocating silence that often filled her grand home. In his presence, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time. Their connection deepened, blossoming into a love that was as exhilarating as it was dangerous. The touch of his hand felt like fire against her skin. The sound of his approaching footsteps made her heart race. Every shared glance, every whispered word was steeped in the knowledge of the chasm that separated their worlds. Hiding their feelings became an intricate dance, a performance far more demanding than any expected of her in society. The conflict simmered beneath the surface, the yearning for this forbidden connection warring with the ingrained fear of her family's inevitable disapproval. She knew discovery would bring a storm, potentially shattering both their lives, yet the pull towards him was undeniable, a desperate escape from the gilded cage that had always been her reality. The heavy scent of roasted game and expensive wine hung in the air, thick with a pretense of familial warmth that the room itself struggled to sustain. Polished silver gleamed under the soft lights, reflecting the hard, expectant faces gathered around the long mahogany table. Sarah sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly beneath the table, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach with each passing moment. Across from her, Michael offered a small, reassuring smile, a gesture that went unnoticed by the others. It was a small, perhaps foolish act of connection, but in that precise instant, her mother's gaze, sharp and assessing, landed upon them. A collective stillness fell over the room. The gentle clinking of forks against plates ceased. Every eye turned towards Sarah and the man beside her. Her father's brow furrowed, a slow, dangerous look crossing his face. The air grew cold, sucking the warmth from the room like a sudden draft. It was the moment of truth, stumbled upon not by brave declaration, but by a simple, unguarded glance. Her mother's voice cut through the silence, laced with a disbelief that bordered on outrage.
Sarah, what is the meaning of this? Who is this person?
Her tone dripped with condescension, implying Michael was an object, not a man. Sarah felt a hot flush creep up her neck.
Mother, this is Michael. He's important to me.
The words were barely a whisper, swallowed by the palpable tension. Her father slammed a hand flat on the table. The crystal glasses jumped, and a ripple went through the wine in a decanter.
Important to you? Don't be absurd, Sarah. We have told you the kind of man you are expected to align yourself with. What is his family name, his position, his holdings?
His eyes scanned Michael, dissecting him with a cold, assessing glare that ignored the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his frame, seeing only the lack of an expensive suit, the absence of a recognized pedigree. Disapproval, sharp and instantaneous, filled the space Michael occupied. It wasn't about his character, his intelligence, or the quiet strength Sarah adored. It was solely, brutally, about what he lacked. He had no fortune, no title, no place in their meticulously constructed world of old money and influence. Her mother scoffed, a harsh, grating sound.
Important? A man with nothing? Sarah, you are bringing shame upon this family. Have you lost your mind? He has no status, no future we could possibly associate ourselves with.
Her voice rose, escalating from disbelief to outright fury. Other relatives began murmuring, their faces a mix of shock and judgmental curiosity. Sarah felt their eyes on her, cold and unforgiving. Michael sat stoically, the target of their scorn, his usual quiet confidence replaced by the uncomfortable stillness of an underdog exposed to the harsh judgment of a world that valued only gold. The conflict had begun, ignited by prejudice and fanned by escalating. Bitter words that hammered home the cruel truth. In this family's eyes, love was secondary to wealth and status. The grand hall, usually a place of bustling servants and casual laughter, felt like a tomb. Sunlight strained through tall leaded windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air, casting long, unforgiving shadows. Ilara stood before them, her parents and elder brother, arranged like judges behind the heavy mahogany table. The scent of polished wood and old money hung heavy, suffocating. She saw no warmth in their eyes, only a chilling resolve that mirrored the frost forming on the window panes outside. Her hands felt cold and clammy, despite the warmth of the room. She could hear the relentless ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, each tick a tiny hammer blow against the sudden, terrifying silence. Her father, the patriarch whose word was law, cleared his throat, the sound unnervingly loud. His gaze was like chipped ice.
We have considered this matter exhaustively, Ilara.
His voice was devoid of emotion, flat and final.
Your attachment is unacceptable. It compromises everything we have built. Our reputation, our alliances, your future.
Her mother, usually a whirlwind of social grace, sat rigid, her face a mask of disapproval.
It is scandalous, dear, truly. Think of the whispers, the doors that will close.
Her tone was sharp, cutting like a finely honed blade.
You are a part of this family, Ilara. You have obligations.
And then came the blow, delivered with ruthless precision by her brother, always the enforcer of their rigid world.
The choice is simple, Ilara. Him and you walk away from all of this.
He gestured around the opulent room, the implication clear. The house, the wealth, the name, the very air she breathed within these walls.
Or us. Your family, your legacy, the security and comfort you have always known. If you choose him, you will have nothing from us. Nothing.
The words struck her like physical blows. Her breath hitched, a small, wounded sound. Nothing. The life she had known since birth, the silken dresses, the heated rooms in winter, the promise of a future built on generations of carefully constructed privilege, all condensed into a single, brutal either-or. Her beloved, the man who saw her soul, the warmth in his eyes, the genuine laughter they shared under the open sky, pitted against everything material and familial. The weight of the decision crushed down on her, heavy as the ancient stones of the mansion itself. Her knees felt weak. She wanted to scream, to plead, but her throat felt tight, dry. The coldness emanating from the table was absolute, a wall she could not breach. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution of a way of life, demanding she wield the axe herself. The unfairness of it all was a bitter taste in her mouth, a profound sense of being trapped and utterly alone. The grand drawing room, usually a haven of hushed formality, crackled with a static tension that seemed to hum in the very air. Expensive tapestries felt heavy. The polished wood floors reflected the glint in her father's cold eyes. The scent of old money and fading jasmine perfume hung thick and suffocating. This was the moment, the precipice she had dreaded, and yet somehow anticipated with a fearful resolve. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear of them, but from the sheer weight of the choice she was about to articulate. She looked from her father, a monolith of tradition and expectation, to her mother, whose face was a mask of disappointment and disdain. They spoke of duty, of legacy, of the man chosen for her, a man of property and status, devoid of shared dreams or whispered intimacies. But the image that filled her mind was not of sprawling estates or ancestral portraits. It was of kind eyes, a gentle touch, a laughter that resonated with her own soul. A different future, one she craved with every fiber of her being, pulled at her heart. A quiet strength settled over her, a warmth spreading from her chest despite the chill in the room. She took a steadying breath, the taste of metallic fear sharp on her tongue, and met her father's gaze directly.
I cannot. My heart belongs elsewhere. I will not marry him.
The words, simple and direct, seemed to echo in the sudden, stunned silence. Her mother gasped, a sharp, unnatural sound. Her father's face, previously stern, contorted into something ugly, a mask of fury she had rarely seen. The carefully constructed facade of their world began to crack.
What insolence! What madness is this? You defy us? Defy your own family?
His voice, usually a low rumble of authority, rose to a roar, shaking the very foundations of the room.
After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us? With this common attachment?
Her mother's voice was laced with venom, dripping with condescension. She stood her ground, the ornate rug feeling strangely rough beneath her worn slippers. The air grew colder, thicker with their outrage. Accusations flew, sharp and cruel, tearing at her like claws. They spoke of shame, of disgrace brought upon their name, of a future she had foolishly thrown away for a fleeting fancy. The volume escalated, their faces red with rage, their words like physical blows.
Then, you are no daughter of mine. You have made your choice. Leave this house. Now. Take nothing but the rags on your back.
The finality in his voice was absolute. A door slamming shut on her past. Her mother turned away, a shudder of theatrical disgust passing through her. There was no trace of warmth, no hint of forgiveness in their eyes. They looked at her as if she were a stranger, an unwelcome stain on their immaculate world. Pushed towards the grand doors, the heavy wood cool against her hands. As she steadied herself, she felt the chill of the outside air immediately. The scent of the late evening garden, normally sweet, now felt alien and cold. Disowned, cast out, she stood alone on the cold stone steps, her small, hastily packed bag containing little more than necessities. The immense house loomed behind her, silent and impenetrable. A stark monument to the home she had lost, a painful price paid for the truth of her own heart. The air in the tiny room hung thick with the smell of damp plaster and stale cooking oil, a stark contrast to the perfumed opulence they had known just weeks before. Every surface felt gritty, every threadbare blanket offered little warmth against the encroaching chill. This was the brutal reality of life in the shadows, a world away from manicured lawns and whispered pleasantries. The shock was a physical blow, a constant ache behind their eyes. They had been cast out, stripped bare, left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bewildered faces of each other reflected in the smudged window pane. The emotional pain was a raw, gaping wound, the sting of betrayal, the cold certainty of abandonment by those they had trusted, settled deep in their bones. Starting over felt less like a challenge and more like an impossible ascent up a sheer, crumbling cliff face with bare hands. Every sunrise brought the same gnawing anxiety. Where would the next meal come from? How would they find shelter for another night? Their former lives, once a source of security and identity, were now a distant, mocking memory, a cruel joke played by fate. They were undeniably the underdog, two souls adrift in a hostile sea, utterly ill-equipped for the storm. The conflict began subtly, in the relentless, grinding effort of simply existing. Hunger was a persistent companion, a dull, sickening ache that overshadowed every thought. The search for work proved futile. Their soft hands and polished manners screamed of a life they no longer possessed, drawing suspicious glances or outright dismissal. Each rejection was a stone dropped into the well of their despair, deepening the shadows around them. Finding a safe place to rest became a daily negotiation with uncertainty, their vulnerability exposed to the indifferent world. Escalation was inevitable. Resources dwindled faster than they could replenish them. They learned the bitter taste of charity that felt like judgment, the humiliation of being overlooked, the chilling indifference of strangers. A shared crust of bread became a feast, clean water a luxury. The simple act of walking down the street required a hyper-awareness they had never needed before. noticing the predatory eyes, the hidden dangers. They were invisible to the world that had once celebrated them, yet terrifyingly exposed in their poverty. The weight of their situation pressed down, threatening to crush the last vestiges of hope. Yet, in the heart of this crushing hardship, a different kind of strength began to forge, born not of wealth or status, but of shared suffering and the fierce, protective bond they now clung to as their only anchor in the storm. The true value of connection, stripped of all material adornments, began to reveal itself in the unforgiving light of their new reality. The air in their small room was thin and bitingly cold, seeping through the cracks around the single window pane. She watched him hunched over the splintered table, not a rich feast laid out, but sketches and worn books, his brow furrowed in concentration that seemed to burn brighter than the flickering candle stub between them. The thin gruel had done little to warm her belly, a constant ache that was a familiar companion now. The rough weave of her worn shawl scratched against her cheek as she pulled it tighter, the chill a constant presence that poverty brought. This was their shared world now, stripped bare of comfort. Yet she saw not just the hardship, but the fire in his eyes, the spark of something the hunger and cold couldn't extinguish. He wasn't like the others. Where others saw closed doors, he saw different ways around them. Where others saw only scarcity, he saw untapped potential in discarded things, in forgotten knowledge. She remembered the feel of his rough, calloused hand holding hers, the surprising gentleness in his touch when despair threatened to overwhelm her. He spoke of contraptions that could draw water more easily, of ways to make the infertile soil yield life, ideas that sounded like fantastical dreams in their stark reality. Yet she listened with a faith that defied their circumstances. She felt the weight of his unspoken burdens, the shame of not being able to provide. But she also felt the fierce pride in the man he was becoming, tempered like steel in the forge of their hardship. She denied herself the last crust, pushing it silently towards his busy hands, needing him strong, needing that light within him to stay alive. A sudden shiver ran through her, not just from the cold, but from the sheer precariousness of their existence. It would have been easy to give up, to tell him his dreams were foolish, to demand he seek simple, back-breaking labor like everyone else. But looking at the determination etched on his face, the quiet passion that consumed him, she knew she couldn't. His unique mind, his unwavering belief in solving problems, these were the seeds of their future. Even if the soil they currently stood on was barren rock. She reached out, her fingers tracing a line on the back of his hand, a silent vow of support. His work wasn't just fanciful notions. It held the promise of lifting them from this struggle, not through brute force, but through ingenuity and vision. Their shared burden was heavy, a relentless pressure. But their shared dream, fueled by his unique gifts and her unwavering belief, was a lifeline in the darkness. It was a testament to a different kind of strength, one found not in wealth or power, but in loyalty, intellect, and the quiet, unyielding support between two souls facing the world together. The air in their small apartment often hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and late-night effort. He pored over blueprints, proposals, ideas that felt like they could change something, anything, for the better. His quiet efforts began small, almost imperceptible to the world outside their four walls. He reached out to contacts, pitched his vision to anyone who would listen, dedicated every spare hour after his demanding day job to building this fragile dream. She watched him, a knot tightening in her stomach with each hopeful glint in his eyes, knowing the world could be unforgiving. The first few attempts were met not with enthusiasm, but polite indifference. Emails went unanswered. Calls were not returned. The feeling of hitting a wall, solid and unyielding, became a frequent companion. He spent weeks crafting a detailed proposal for a local initiative he believed in deeply, pouring his heart and limited resources into it. The day the rejection letter arrived felt like a physical blow.
Not aligning with current strategic priorities.
He crumpled the letter, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and the smell of the ink felt bitter in the air. Failure stacked up like a pile of discarded drafts. A small-scale project he managed to get off the ground faltered due to unexpected regulations. Another idea was subtly borrowed by someone with more connections, leaving him with nothing but the exhaustion of the effort. The lack of recognition was perhaps the cruelest cut. He saw others, less dedicated, less honest, climb ahead on inflated claims or outright theft of ideas he had shared in vulnerable moments of hope. The world seemed to reward noise, not quiet perseverance. Friends offered well-meaning but disheartening advice.
Maybe this just isn't for you. Isn't it time to be realistic?
They were doing everything right, pouring every ounce of themselves into their aspirations. Yet the universe seemed determined to push back with relentless force, leaving them bruised and questioning if their quiet struggle would ever lead to anything but loud, echoing setbacks.